That's a bit of a, to me, that's a bit of a mic drop moment. I think I just want to repeat or re-paraphrase what you just said. Like, people will not hear you until they have been heard first. That is like, to me, that's like mic drop, because it's absolutely, that's the key right there. If you can
Yeah.
just shut your trap for two minutes and just listen to
Yes.
somebody, that you will get their attention. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Executive Exhale podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have a friend and a colleague of mine by the name of Ian McLeod here on the show today. Ian's a seasoned leader and trainer with an impressive 15-year career in management at a large nonprofit organization. His journey has seen him rise to senior roles, overseeing 5 large teams and managing around 80 staff members. His dedication doesn't stop there, though. He spent an additional 5 years training and onboarding new leaders while fostering the ongoing development of a robust leadership team. His commitment to leadership excellence is bolstered by a business administration degree and his current pursuit of a master's in management and leadership. His career is marked not just by positions and accolades, but by meaningful connections he's forged with people from all around the world, including myself and here in Canada. He's been recognized for his ability to engage audiences. He has a YouTube channel, does his own content. We'll have all the links for you after we're done here today. He's a talent that reflects both his professional expertise and his decade-long stint performing in the local music scene of Austin, Texas. And with resiliency and honesty, he's navigated some complex experiences, finding strategies to manage and move forward. His openness about his journey, combined with his vast leadership knowledge, makes his story one of growth, connection, and perseverance. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Wow, Tammy, that was, I mean, way better than I could have said it. So thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you and hang out with you today, as always.
Yeah,
Um,
no worries.
that was an
So good to
excellent
have
intro.
you. Love Austin. Been there a few times. It's a beautiful city.
It's a great city. It's, eclectic and weird and fun. It's a great place to be. The only thing is, it gets hot, so the weather is not super great. Right now, we're hitting allergy season as well, so that's always fun. But I still wouldn't trade it. It's a great place to
Nothing
be.
says fun like getting off at the airport and seeing a bunch of guitars all over the place. That's
Yes,
it's
we
carousel.
we love our music scene pretty much. I mean, that line in there about me being in part of the music scene, that's kind of, it's a part of being an Austinite. You have to be in
Yeah,
a band or something. So
yeah. Or at the very minimum, go and karaoke somewhere for fun.
yes, absolutely, you're out
Okay.
some doing something musically,
Yeah,
music
I did get
related.
a chance to do that. Next time we go,
Yes,
we'll go karaoke somewhere.
for sure.
So beyond the introduction, maybe I always like to start with the guest, right? In terms of,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're about, and sort of what has led you to where you are right now. It's a big question, but sort of high level, sort of Coles notes. Who's Ian and what are you about?
Well, one, I think you did an excellent job of sharing everything about my kind of past and current work, present. But I will say, in terms of leadership and management, so I do have a small consulting kind of firm where I provide mostly my focus is on performance management, training. So around setting expectations, delivering feedback, coaching, that kind of thing, usually for entry to mid-level managers is really my focus. I feel like there seems to be a big gap. So even with the education that I'm have got received and continue to work on, I think that that's an opportunity that's kind of missing in a lot of the education that's out there related to business and management. So this is something people are doing every day of having to talk to their staff and try to help them move towards success with whatever goals they're setting. So that's really my focus. I will say, my leadership journey. So I worked at the American Cancer Society, a large nonprofit, for 20 years. I was for 5 years. I was kind of just doing my thing. I enjoyed my job. It was kind of more an entry level front facing job, and I was doing music and that kind of thing. And I kept getting asked to possibly do more to for if I was interested in promotions, and I had no, it wasn't anything that was ever on my radar as far as being
Right.
in leadership. But eventually I started trying, taking on different projects and doing some mentoring, doing kind of team lead work. And I just started falling in love with it. The the thing was with the organization I was with, they had a really robust kind of leadership development program and training. So I was just very fortunate to be in that environment where they were providing a lot of that. I started incorporating that, and again, just fell in love with the concept of it. And really, what I found was that I mean, I sincerely believe that people oftentimes aren't the problem. The lack of knowledge or training or skill development is often the issue. So, if you can just help people figure out what the root challenge is, what they need to, and what resources or training or knowledge they need to overcome that, they can oftentimes be successful. So, I've certainly seen that where I've actually applied what I've learned, and I just continue to kind of learn. And that's where then I started wanting to share that with the world, and through YouTube and TikTok and my own training services. So that's kind
Yeah.
of a story behind the concept behind where I've come from and where I am now.
Yeah, if you haven't found Ian on TikTok, you have to go to his channel. He's got some pretty entertaining takes on leadership, including some that include troopers. So if you're into Star Wars, you need to go to his channel. Well, as you know, this channel, I'm all about helping leaders. As you know, I've recently rebranded to move away from strict leadership executive coaching to more of a wellness spin, helping folks with stress management. Because ultimately, when we manage our stress and we manage our workload, we are better leaders, because when we're stressed, we're reactive, we're not creative, right? And so I wonder, in the work you do, you've got sort of your tactical operational stuff that you share with staff, getting people trained up in certain tactics on how to talk, how to have difficult conversations, all those things. But then what are some of the tactics that you maybe support these same people in managing their stress and wellness?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm certainly not. I'm a big proponent, but I'm not an expert as you are, and whether it be those kind of self care aspects. I think, well, obviously, one, you kind of alluded to that, was just the humor in
Yeah.
things is important. And I will say, even in my, some of that humor came out simply because I was trying to create content related to whatever subject, corporate jargon or something like that, and it just sounded ridiculous. So instead, I'll just make a funny video about it, and hopefully, I'll get the same message about how silly corporate jargon can be, and make people laugh. So I think it's important, and there's plenty of studies that actually show that including humor can be really helpful in terms of just being able to connect with others, and kind of lower those high stress situations and into be more manageable, and just be more realistic of, look, this is feels kind of silly, or maybe this isn't as important as we're making it out to be, that kind of thing. But I think, one of the things too, when I think of stress and burnout, is just developing a stronger understanding of your role, your purpose, the reality of meeting your goals, having a clear vision, a plan to execute, and being able to stick to those things. I know it sounds, the opposite, where it's still very management kind of heavy, but understanding, what you're doing and why you're doing this can really help to keep that motivation going. In psychology, there's a bias called the illusion of control, and so I think there's so many things that you just don't have control over.
Mhm.
So being able to focus on what you can control. I think stress often comes from feeling overwhelmed and out of control. So, realizing that there will be obstacles, things will always break, chaos will always happen, and just being proactive where you can and plan for things being out of control. I feel like that, just having that awareness, can really help quite a bit.
Yeah. I love that. In fact, there's the framework that I have. I have a slide, and it has like a spy, sort of like the spy versus spy cartoon in it. And it's the CIA framework, right? What you control, what you influence, and what you're absent of control and influence, and kind of figuring out what your work is. So yeah, that's a tangible tactical approach, but at the same time, understanding what you control and influence has a huge implication in how we manage our stress. Because I know one thing for me, I put that framework in place for myself even before I left my 9 to 5, because I was burnt out, and
Mm.
legitimately burnt out, like a actual diagnosis of burnout. And one of the things I had to do before I even left my job was start letting go of the things I no longer controlled. Like, I had to stop I had to release myself of being responsible for the outcomes of things I had no control over. And as hard as that was, it was a necessary component of that exercise. So thanks for sharing that because that's an important piece to that. For yourself, when you're feeling stressed or when you feel your resilience is sort of taking a tank, and we won't get into the politics, but let's face it, a lot of people are into that period of stress right now. How are you doing? Like, what are you doing to sort of support yourself in these sort of more turbulent times that everyone is experiencing?
I mean, I hate to keep kind of reverting back to this, but I think, and this is something more from what fascinates me with leadership and management in general is more the psychology of things. And I think it's important for people, especially anybody in a position of leadership. One of the things when we talk about control, I mean, you can't control other people, right? People are irrational. Our brains are designed for survival, and this can lead to all kinds of irrational behavior and thinking. So I think particularly for leaders, managers, we're in the business of managing people, so it's important to understand why and how people behave, and just understanding that psychology, I think, can be helpful, at least for me. I try to remind myself of, okay, this is how people kind of behave. So I don't know if you've ever seen or read Daniel Kahneman's famous psychologist. He had his book Think Fast and Slow,
Right.
and pretty much the entirety of the book, the message was that people behave irrationally. They make these kind of irrational decisions. So yeah, I mean, right now in a situation where it feels very overwhelming, tumultuous. There's a lot of mixed emotions and feelings going on. Certainly, some people are excited about different results that are happening in the world. Others are obviously feeling dismayed and uncertain. I think for me, it's just understanding this is how people behave, and again, trying to stick back to that original plan, whatever it may be, and get back to focus can really help me at the very least. For this, yeah, I think that's really the challenge is just reminding myself. I used to with when I had supervisors who reported up to me. People would be really stressed, and I would kind of try to remind them that, like, at one point on this planet, we didn't exist. There were dinosaurs roaming around. I mean, like, this
Yeah.
thing, whatever you're worried about, this fire is not really that big of a fire and not really that big of a concern. So,
Yeah, it's a bit about a
perspective,
perspective check almost.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find yourself so let me ask a question. When I use the word mindfulness, what does that evoke for you and what does that and are you incorporating any kind of mindfulness into your world? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, again, and I'm talking more on a kind of awareness, and that's really how I've learned to kind of focus. So I have had experiences with my own. So certainly, I performed out. I've at least been acknowledged for being able to speak publicly and generally do a good job at that. But I've had my fair share of panic attacks and challenges with that. Well, actually, I recall back to one specific time where I did, and that kind of just continued on. But I think from that, what really came out of that was this kind of whole thing that I'm talking about. Where I was in a stressful situation. I didn't trust the people in the room. I didn't trust whether or not they have. I felt betrayed. I felt had a lot of feelings of fear and concerns. And those things, I think, really then unfortunately caused me to be in this kind of fight or flight mode, which oftentimes I think is what results in anxiety, panic, those kind of things. So for me personally, getting back to really understanding the psychology behind that and why I behave the way I do and how do I control that. I think that's really helped me to, again, having that awareness. Then I can tell myself, okay, this is a result. I'm feeling this way as a result. I'm starting to get kind of worked up, or I'm starting to get stressed out, and this is a result of this kind of way that our brains behave. And I just need to take a step back, think about perspective, and focus, and just understand that this is kind of this irrational behavior, even on myself, is part of being human.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest things to do is trying to figure out how to backpedal when we start to spiral.
Yeah,
And it's the reason why I bring mindfulness to leadership conversations now because we need to learn how to hack our own biology because there's science behind this, right?
yeah,
There's, as you say, the very logical way of doing this, of where we look at what's the psychology behind why I'm reacting the way I'm reacting right now, and what about this is causing this sort of panic feeling that I'm having. And then there's the I'm going to say the more sort of parasympathetic, sort of emotional side of things, where if we just hack our systems by breathing in a certain pattern, for example, which I
mhm,
talk about in other ways and other places on the channel, we can actually hack our systems and reset the system so that when we're trying to think creatively or when we're trying to, it helps our brains to kind of reset when we connect to our bodies. So it's interesting to me
absolutely.
because this is an area that I think people have been a bit leery of because we see mindfulness as being kind of woo woo or being part of that,
I
for lack
think
of better words, granola crunching yoga types. But at the end of the day, there's science that really brings this to the fore for us leadership pieces as well.
I think they go hand in hand,
Yeah.
like they really are partnered together. So there's a cognitive scientist who studied this phenomenon of like choking, that kind of thing. Her name's Sion Bylock. I hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Sion Bylock, and she's done a bunch of great studies with that. But one of the things they found with behind like choking and that kind of thing and why it's so important to just do something like just to breathe
Mhm.
is you have two components of your brain. So you have your working memory and your procedural memory. And so your working memory, the goal is, or it's helpful for learning a new task. It also kicks in when there's perceived danger, so you need it for survival. Your
Yeah.
procedural memory, on the other hand, is that part of the brain that builds up, and almost is automatic after doing, much practice and learning, and so it has those kind of automatic actions. So
Mhm.
when you see someone who usually in sports or even in public speaking or performing, when you think of public speaking, I mean, we all are practiced with speaking every day, but for some reason you get in front of a large crowd and you get nervous, right,
Yeah.
and then you can't speak, and that unfortunately is because your working memory has taken over your procedural memory. So there actually is a science behind this. When you see athletes choke, it's because although they've done this whatever this activity thousands of times,
Mhm.
their brain now is concerned about whatever reason, right? They've put all this extra stress on a situation. Maybe there's somebody watching or there's something on the line.
Yeah.
And so that working memory overrides, and that's why you choke. So simply doing something, what they suggest oftentimes is if you're getting scared, instead try to, in a way, keep your working memory busy by breathing. Is a great technique, obviously. So just making that working memory kind of focus on something. And I tend to actually, I like the breathing exercise where I just kind of try to breathe and remind myself to breathe, and focus on that. And what that does is distracts your working memory so that your procedural memory can kick in when you need it most. So that's kind of the science behind it in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And having seen this myself, both in practice and with my clients, I can totally validate that. It's really important to leverage your biology, whether it's your brain or your physiological, neurological system throughout peripheral and central is really important. So I love that. You mentioned earlier that you suffered from some panic attacks, which is sort of like the I'm gonna say the extreme level of anxiety will show up as a panic attack, which is when our
Yeah.
neurological system completely spirals. So what has managing those things has that impacted your perspective of leadership and wellness, if at all? And, like, has it changed the way you do things now, having had that experience?
I will say so, and again, this is where I think the psychology aspect was really helpful for me
Right.
to understand what the heck was happening, right? Because I had experience where I was, just always felt really comfortable to speak up in a meeting or perform on stage. So speaking in front of a group wasn't really a challenge. Looking back, what I realized is I was in as kind of a stressful situation. And again, I was with a group of people who I didn't trust. And
Mm,
so I think that there was actual real kind of fear there, and that manifested in something that really triggered me. I wasn't, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just, clearly I had this panic attack. And then every time, it felt like almost every time I went to go then publicly speak, whether it be just in a meeting or presenting. And I had to do it often because I was in this kind of senior manager role. So it was always in meetings, always, and sometimes, and this was at a center with 500 staff. So there was
right.
usually large groups. So it was a challenge. It probably took me, I want to say, probably a couple years for me to really overcome all of that. And I don't know if I'm ever really, completely over all of that. I mean, I think it still can always creep up. But what helped me most was just understanding, again, physiologically, psychology, from the psychology standpoint, why is this happening to me? Why am I doing this? And then again, to your point, trying to figure out ways to override that or help with that before it becomes a problem. So breathing, being able to again engage my working memory has really helped me quite a bit. And I'll be honest, just I think the being candid and open about this too has really helped to at least feel like I'm not this, I'm not a horrible person because I did experience this. Like I'm human, and it is something that I think a lot of people unfortunately go through in some regard.
It's interesting because you mentioned the notion of vulnerability, which is, I mean, the leadership challenge, a big fan of the leadership challenge from Kouzes and Posner. And that's one of the things is just being able to be willing to show some vulnerability in who
Yeah,
you are, because then it shows your humanity, right? You're not this like senior leadership, I don't know, icon that everyone's to respect and admire. It's yes, maybe, but yes, and you also are human,
yeah,
you
and
know?
and there's research that actually shows that people connect with you more if you are, especially if you are in a kind of a leadership management role, if you demonstrate that you have faults and make mistakes and you're not perfect. um,
Mhm.
People are actually they engage and connect with you more and are more supportive. So it's actually a good thing for leaders to admit their mistakes and
Right.
their challenges that they have. And I think that's the thing that then can help others see that, okay, my leader experiences this and is not perfect. And so they kind of lose that feeling of they have to be perfect in front of their leader as well. And it's okay for them to make mistakes. It builds that trust, and then can really build a culture where people are much more understanding and willing to receive feedback and open to that feedback, and can really again move towards the goals that they're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of great things that can come out of being vulnerable and open with your staff and with yourself.
That you mentioned the building of trust and how vulnerability can help to build that. So when you're working with leaders and you're doing the development pieces, what other things do you recommend to start really building and on those pieces to build the trust in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts oftentimes with people. I think one of the biggest challenges within leadership is people don't really understand their role
Mm,
as a leader, and they kind of have this skewed sense. And so, trying to help them start there in terms of
right.
what's your purpose, what are you doing here with your role. And oftentimes their role should be to again help create kind of a line from your mission to whatever that department is or that team is or those individuals that you're supporting are. Align those goals to that mission. Understand that purpose that in your work, and make sure people feel valued, and you're supporting them through that process. Oftentimes though, I think leaders, they have this kind of idea that they need to do all the work, or they need to be perfect in everything that they do. So I think it's just starting in terms of what are the outcomes, what are you really trying to achieve as a leader, and making sure that they are aligning those things. Because I feel like oftentimes what what concerns they're bringing forward don't align with that at all,
Right.
and the actions that they're taking are actually counter to a lot of the things that they're trying to do. So you'll see this oftentimes in kind of a, I don't want to say a conflict meeting, but a meeting where you have staff who are sharing, concerns or challenges with the work that they're doing, and
Yeah.
the leader automatically is like becomes defensive and is trying to, well, here's all the reasons why it's not working, or this is all my obstacles, and instead they really should be listening, and making sure that those staff feel heard and valued, and saying something instead to the effect of, it sounds like you really care about your constituents, and or you care about your peers, and you want to do the best job you can. Let's talk more about how we accomplish that, and I want to hear, tell me more about those challenges that you're having. And instead they just want, they want to try to sweep all the problems under the rug, and
Hmm.
I think it's just, unfortunately, it's just a lack of understanding of what their role is. I know I kind of went on there for a minute, but
No, there's actually some really good nuggets out of that. So what I heard, I was just taking some notes. So what I heard
yeah,
from you is that you see trust being built in an organization when you align your activities to basically the common vision or the common values, I would
yeah,
argue as well, right?
absolutely,
Then there's active listening and open dialogue and not getting defensive, which includes not getting defensive is active listening, right? Just
right,
being willing to check your ego to the side for just a minute and just sort of hear them out and see what is really at the root of these complaints and what's going on. And then understanding your role is really important. And then I would add to that. So I just want to share a story real quick. When I was managing the national stockpile for the country, we had lots of situations where there were some contentious issues in the blue collar space.
mm,
Some of it was challenging because there was always risks that could escalate. And one of the things that, to your point, that I was really clear about doing was sort of detangling the us versus them mentality between the worker staff and the senior leadership, which I was considered a part of, and really trying to bring us to sort of similar levels and having those open dialogues. And I found that, and I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on this, because I know for me, the people that were the most vocal, that had the most complaints, say, often there was a line of truth underneath what they were saying. Maybe it was a little exemplified, maybe it was a little overthrown, maybe it was a little hyperbolic, but there was always a root, a thread of like truth underneath what they were bringing to the table. And when you started to actually detangle what that truth moment is, and when you start to actually test and validate that truth with either their fellow colleagues or maybe an approach you could take, suddenly the voices started to kind of settle down, kind of because they're starting to feel heard. So I'm curious
yes.
about that around when you have that contentious conversation, because I know you do work on this conflict stuff. When we say active listening, I want to say it goes beyond just listening. You're actually looking for the truth, the underlying truth to the complaints.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is kind of goes back to what I was referring to about, talking about how people behave irrationally, and
Yeah.
why and how people behave, like the psychology behind that. People are speaking from their perspective, right? And it's oftentimes a limited kind of
Yeah.
view, and you as a leader, you typically are privy to way more information, and you should be seeing it from a much bigger picture standpoint, and
Mm,
trying to understand all angles. Your frontline staff, these people in these different roles, they're doing their day-to-day job. They have no
yeah.
idea what you're doing all day in your meetings. And that's the thing. I mean, that's literally their comment is like, yeah, y'all just sit around and meet all day long, and what the hell do you do? I'm actually doing the work. And there's truth to that. I mean, that is true, especially for them. That's what they feel. So, I think helping them feel, to your point, and I think what we're talking about here is making sure that they feel heard, and making sure that they understand that they are valued. And again, that's kind of that bringing that purpose in, and aligning that the work that they are doing is valuable, and you want to hear from them so that you can help, make improvements, whether it be
Mm,
to their experience, or their productivity and efficiency, or the quality of their work,
yeah.
whatever it may be. There's always opportunity to improve, and so making sure that they feel heard, I think, is People are oftentimes not going to hear you until they themselves feel heard. So if they
Ah,
the technique that you need to be, you should typically be taking is making sure that let them share their concerns. Make sure you validate those in some way. Make sure that you say respond back that you actually hear them. And then, you can simply ask, I hear this is what I'm hearing from you. Would you be open to an alternative viewpoint, or would you be open to other ideas or something like that?
mhm.
Most of the time they're going to say yes because they now feel validated, and that's when then you can present. I think unfortunately I've seen it too many times where you got these two sides that, this leadership side is trying to just, well, do what we say, and why won't you just, you need to do it this way, and that kind of thing. You're not making sure that your staff are feeling heard, and you're not demonstrating leadership in that capacity. And again, I think that has this larger kind of stress, and leads to all the burnout and all the challenges. It's the stuff, the work that you're having to do,
Yeah.
in the work that you're presently working on, is a result of these kind of this unresolved conflicts that are happening all the time.
That's a bit of a to me, that's a bit of a mic drop moment. I think I just want to repeat or re-paraphrase what you just said. Like, people will not hear you until they have been heard first. That is like, to me, that's like mic drop, because it's absolutely, that's the key right there. If you can
Yeah.
just shut your trap for 2 minutes and just listen to
Yes.
somebody, that you will get their attention. And, to be frank, I think, again, not bringing politics into this, but the reality is when you see a lot of division, it's because one side is not being heard. The other refuses and pushes a narrative. And that, by the way, can go on either side. I don't care
Yeah.
what side of the house you're on, right? The reality
Absolutely.
is that you're not hearing each other, because until you've been heard first, you refuse to hear the other side. And I think we're seeing this playing out on the global stage right now in a pretty massive way. So this is a really important piece, to leadership. And as leaders, it starts with us. We
Yeah.
got to start with this first.
Yeah. There's uh I think his name's Jared Clifton, and I apologize. I know his first name is like Jared, Jer. But he does work and research on what's called primal belief and
Right.
people's primal beliefs. And essentially, people have these primal core beliefs. It is very, very hard to change those. So this idea that you can somehow out debate somebody, with just overrated, whether you have facts or
Mhm.
whatever they are. I mean, it's really difficult to change somebody's mind. So again, to your point, making sure, whether it be on a large global kind of scale, political wise, or just in an office setting, or work environment, making sure that people feel heard and validated, and then you can present your side and hopefully come to some sort of compromise. Oftentimes too, I will say, one of the things with that, making sure they feel heard, and then the next step I think is find common ground. Like, what do
Mhm.
we agree on, right? So where, and start from that place. So we agree that, we want to create a great customer experience, right? Or whatever it is, or we want to create a great quality product. Like, let's start there. We both agree on that. Now how do we get there? And let's hear your side and my side and come to that.
I love this. I one of the Another story, when I was running, overseeing the development of a framework, which people hate that word, but it's really just a process that was going to enable mutual assistance between provinces and territories, which is the equivalent to interstate assistance in emergencies. And I remember we were at a meeting and we had provincial, so state authority equivalents, provincial authorities, and we had the federal authorities. And we had our marching orders about what we wanted to do. And when we walked in the room, we immediately were attacked with what their perspective was. And what was interesting in that is, taking a page out of what you just shared with us, is I realized instantaneously we are getting nowhere pushing our agenda. So I suggested we stop the meeting for 15 minutes and go reset, grab coffee, and we'll come back in. And when I came back in, one of the first things, I got my leadership to agree to let me just let me do this. Let's try this. We were losing already, so let's just try this. And I went in and I said, okay, let's just check our egos at the door here. What is the purpose of us meeting here today? And the purpose of the meeting, if I understand correctly, is we want to reduce mortality and morbidity in emergencies. So we want to support each other through the deployment of assets across jurisdictions to support each other when we have emergencies, correct? Yes. Okay. And what we don't agree on is the how, right? Yes. Okay. So we now know that that's the problem space. So can we start having a conversation what the how might look like? Let's open the conversation. We're gonna check our egos. Fed hats are at the door. We are legitimately here to listen. And we spent the next, I would say, 2, 3, 4 hours. Honestly, it was in that length of time just listening to the input of what they were looking for. Now it took 5 years, but I got consensus endorsement of a framework across the country that is still being used today for emergencies like floods and fires and things like that. It was used in COVID to bring nurses to Toronto and so on. So this is why it's super important that we
Yes.
sit down and have these open conversations. And I would say now more than ever, because of the political crap that's going on right now in any country, by the way. Germany's having their challenges. Canada has their issues. The United States clearly does. Everybody's having their challenges. So I think it more than ever, it's important for us all to just listen to what the other side has to say and try to find that middle ground, as you say. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. Well, and again, sticking to what outcomes you're trying to achieve. I think the
Yeah.
problem is, and you see this even in a small space, but you certainly see this on these larger scales that you're talking about. But you can see this in a workplace too. Is that people are arguing to win a point, and that's not you. If that's your outcome is to win an argument, that what kind of outcome is that? Like your outcome should be we're trying to solve these bigger problems. And
Yeah.
and that I think is then they somebody presents their case or their concern or their argument, and all they care about is winning that argument. And that's not helping anybody. It's not ultimately helping themselves other than their ego. Like you said, you got to check the ego at the door, and again focus on what those outcomes you're trying to achieve. Kind of bringing it back to I'd mentioned Daniel Kahneman's book, the Think Fast and Slow. It was all about, the book is all about decision making, and particularly, unfortunately, most people are making irrational quick decisions with very little information, and we often are way too confident about that decision because we came up with this thing in our brain and we
Yeah.
think we all. I mean, there's been, again, thinking of psychology, right? The vast majority of people think that they're smarter than everybody else, right? So, which is statistically impossible. There's no way that every person on the planet can be smarter than everybody else.
Yeah.
It's impossible to have that, right? So we all think we are all way too overconfident on our thoughts. Instead, to your point, we need to listen so that we can take in all that information. There is and not to change directions too far, but there's a psychologist, Naomi Rothman, and she studies ambivalence, and the idea of being ambivalent. Oftentimes, unfortunately, it can you can be seen like an ambivalent kind of leader can be considered somewhat seen as a weak leader, but they oftentimes typically create better results. Usually when we think of leaders, we think of people who are, very decisive and very strong in their decisions and that kind of things. Leaders are supposed to be decisive. We perceive that strength from that,
Mhm.
and that ability to have these strong opinions and not ever waver. And I think it's important, like in a dire emergency, when there's a clear decision needs to be made, that's important, but that's really rare. That doesn't happen very often. So
Right.
instead, we really should be processing and receiving all this information. I will say too that I think at least also the research that Naomi Rothman did, women typically may be more ambivalent or seen as ambivalent, and that oftentimes can lead towards again better leadership. They might be perceived as initially not a strong leader, but ultimately they're going to be more open to let's hear all sides, let's get all the information, and let's make the best decision possible given all the information we can receive. So
Yeah, there's a component of emotional intelligence that women, just by our very natures, tend to espouse. a higher degree, it's part of what keeps our children alive, because if you can read the room, you can keep them safe.
Yeah.
So it's an emotional intelligence that women tend to intrinsically have. Not all. I don't want to generalize. Some women do not have it, but there is, and that can create that sort of sense, the semblance of ambivalence. I can say, as myself as a leader, I could be very decisive, and then other times I wasn't ambivalent so much as I was evaluating the stage, right? And it can come
Right.
off as an ambivalence to someone who's generally very decisive on very little information. So that's a good point. Now,
Yeah.
before we start to wrap up, you brought up the topic of women in leadership, and obviously we know under the current political climate in a variety of places across the world, not just in the U.S., women are going to be facing increasingly more difficulties in their roles as leaders. I mean, I have thoughts on this as a woman in the leadership space, but I'm curious as to what you think might be needed to support them and not just maintaining their wellness and their resilience through all of this, but supporting them as leaders as we go into the next 4, 5, however many years.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was kind of going with this. Unfortunately, and not to get too deep into any politics, but I personally feel that the decisions that were made, back in 2016 and now, in terms of Clinton and now Harris not moving into the roles that they should have, was a result of them being women. Unfortunately, there's there is a concern by many people that, I don't know many people, but seems to be, this strong concern by people that women don't make great leaders, and the reality is that there's plenty of research that shows that women actually do make better leaders than men for the most part. It's marginal, it's not by huge amounts, but there has been various research that's demonstrated that. You alluded to the emotional intelligence, the ability to demonstrate empathy. What I would suggest for, anyone who's wanting to be supportive, or for women in general, is just to be reminded of that women do make outstanding leaders, and we need more of them. And that regardless of these, decisions that have been recently made and will continue to be made and supported, I think just being confident in the fact that women do deserve a place at the leadership table, whatever it may be, and they should be there, and it would be good for the world, the country, the corporation, whatever it may be, to have women in leadership in those roles. Now, I mean, we can argue, about what's fair and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that men don't make great leaders. Certainly they do, but there is definite research that shows that women, in many different regards, make great leaders. So again, the research that Naomi Rothman was doing, in terms of ambivalence, I think that's really helpful. And again, the idea of empathy, as well. Empathy is not sympathy. It's not about feelings. It's about understanding perspectives, and people who can, again, understand the other side's perspectives are better at negotiating, making a deal, compromising, finding the win-win. All of that requires that empathy. And so, again, my
My
feeling, or
ability
my,
to get my ability to get consensus endorsement on a national
I
uh,
mean,
package is a demonstration of that.
right, right,
I
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that where I'm trying to go is that I think women, we need to make sure that there is a space for women, and I think in general you should be looking to try to have inclusive and diverse groups, across the spectrums in every different demographic and direction, whether it be gender or age or race or sexuality or whatever it may be, simply because you're going to get different perspectives, and those different perspectives will give different ideas to then create innovative ideas for, innovative solutions to problems. If you have a homogeneous kind of group where you have everybody who thinks and acts the same, you're only going to get one solution out of that versus potentially 20 different solutions. And so, again, I think there's huge value in having women be a part of a leadership group, and so I would just encourage them to continue to show up and work towards this because they deserve every bit of a space that everybody else is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that for me, gosh, this is such a touchy subject for me because I've been alive long enough. I'm 52, so I'm a I've been alive long enough to remember when women could not own property, when women could not
Yeah.
be rented property if they had children and were solo. I remember my mother not being able to get a credit card without my father's permission, or open up a bank account without my father's permission, or speak to the phone company without the man of the house. And we couldn't own property and be able to buy things like cars and get loans up until probably the early 80s. So this is all still very new and fresh for us. So I think that as leaders, one of the things that's I think is going to be important in the years to come is going to be not allowing people's voices to be silenced. And that's going to be a hard ask in the next 4 to 6 years because we need to really plan. And I say 4 to 6 because we are going into an election cycle in Canada. So we also have some similar issues here. Is it's going to be really important to support each other. So for the men out there listening to this, we're asking you, if you believe in our voices being at the table, to step up and be a voice for us, because we can't do this by ourselves. We have to help. We have to have our partners in crime in this, supporting us along the way. It's in the same way that straight people support queer, in the same way that, those kinds of things, we need to have our alliances sort of in play. And for the women out there, my suggestion is join organizations that you believe in. Find ways to express your voice. Don't feel hopeless and disabled by what's going on around you, but rather find your tribe. And I don't want to use tribe. That's not a good word because Indigenous people get very offended by that, and they should be. But find people that are like you in the sense that they
Mhm.
want to support and move forward on things and really turn the tide. Because bringing it back to research, it's even broader than just leadership and EI. In public health, there's some clear research that has been done by WHO and other organizations that demonstrate that when women are enabled in their communities, i.e., given some financial authority or given the ability to manage the community's safety and well-being, that deaths from birth rate issues, like deaths go down, overall health goes up, overall satisfaction goes up, suicide rates drop, that the generally the rates of violence go down. So it's really about the community lens that we all can bring
Mhm.
to the table, and there's some legitimate science that supports this. That
Yeah.
we when we disable one half of the equation, we're basically cutting the legs off the body. And I think that it's very short-sighted when we try to keep people in these lanes. So yeah, this is going to be a very interesting time for all of us, but supporting each other's voices. And by the way, I'm just going to put that CTA out there. If you're challenged with this, reach out to Ian, reach out to me. We'll work with you. Like we'll help you to find your voice, to help you stand in your power and just continue to move forward on these things, because this is something that I think we're both pretty passionate about. What's next for you? What's next for Ian? What's up in the horizon for you?
Yeah, I'm working on my master's degree in management and
That's
leadership
amazing.
at
Awesome.
yeah, so I'm enjoying it at the University of Houston Bauer College of Business. So I'll be honest, I miss working in a one kind of singular space. So I'm certainly, I think once I'm past that, probably going to be looking at just trying to get a career. So if anybody's out there looking to hire a leadership development person, certainly reach out. But I think that that's kind of next. But I mean, I'm just enjoying sharing. I'm enjoying learning and then sharing this information out to the world. I think that improving leadership is would improve the world vastly. There's a lot of folks that move into leadership roles that don't really understand it, and were oftentimes just promoted or what have you. So, um, spending some time learning and development is, important for everyone, especially leaders. So, I'm just excited about being a part of this and continuing on that journey. And yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in this kind of stuff, please hit me up in terms of training services, consulting. or just, you want to see a silly video, I have those too. So reach out for sure. But I mean, I just love talking about this. I could nerd out forever about this stuff, Tammy, to be quite honest. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to chat about it.
No, I'm glad to have you, and like I said, we could probably talk about this stuff for, like, the next hour or 2, but,
Yes.
try to have to keep this somewhat relatively
Right.
under control in terms of timelines. For folks that are interested in anything Ian has shared today, if anything resonated, you really just wanna connect with him online, all the links will be in the show notes, so feel free to go down there and take a look at that, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're listening to this on some Spotify-esque kind of environment, feel free to take a look at the show notes. Thanks again for being here. Super, again, I love having you on the show. I'll be happy the next time you get to come back on the show. And maybe once you're done your degree, you can come back on and share your new perspectives after having done your degree.
Yeah.
Um, but in the meantime, folks, I just want to thank you for being here. If you are listening to this on a podcast, make sure to follow this podcast. Rate the podcast. It helps the show get spread so folks can listen to this kind of content. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all the things because it's free and it helps this channel out. Remember, folks, to stay grounded, stay inspired, and always remember to exhale.